All right, let's get into it. I guess first of all, I'd love to know how you started doing this work. Like, where's the in when it comes to developing music for television and games? Like, how do you teach yourself this?
I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of different ways to get in, I suppose. There's a couple of different approaches you can take. For me, it was playing in front of a live audience. When I was younger, when I was 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, I played in a lot of bands. And I spent a lot of my weekends outside of school playing in front of, people and crowds in pubs. And what was really great about that is it taught me the kind of reactions that you can get from people based on the music that you're playing. So, if you change the music, if you make it more intense, people dance more intense. If you slow things down, people start, doing more romantic dances and stuff like that. So it kind of taught me that reaction that people can get from music. And that was pretty much the only formal training I had for this sort of stuff. It's just learning by that sort of by the ropes on how music can influence people.
It's interesting. It's when I talked to Hugo Martin, he talked about how doing stand-up sort of informed the way he writes. So it's interesting to hear that performing music sort of gave you that same insight.
Yeah, Hugo's a really interesting guy too. I'm glad you had a chance to speak to him because for me, when I went and visited the offices, just being able to sit down with him and just the language that he uses is it's very intellectual individual, Hugo. And the way he thinks about Doom, the way he thinks about creativity and art is on such a high level. It's really refreshing to be around. He's a really cool guy.
I want to talk about the Doom stuff just in a little bit. Can I get a little bit of insight into sort of what you did before you worked? I guess before you worked with Machine Games specifically, like what was your sort of like first, contract or the first piece of work you did for TV or for games?
Yeah, sure. The first video game I ever worked on was a game called Destroy All Humans. And it was a game made down here in Australia. It was a lot of fun. You played as a little alien that was coming down to Earth to invade and get the Earth ready for the alien invasion force. And of course, that meant running around and killing a lot of people. So that was a good fun project to start on there. After I left the studio, I started doing more contract work. And the first contract I picked up was a Nickelodeon game. And it was a lot of fun because it allowed me to write music in the style of SpongeBob and then in the style of Danny Phantom and then in the style of Jimmy Neutron and, all these different sort of Nickelodeon franchises, which was great because it gave me a really good taster as all sorts of different musical styles. I moved on from there. I worked with THQ for a whole bunch of years while they were still around. Then I ended up working with EA for a few years on the Need for Speed franchise. And then after doing that for, almost 8-9 years, that whole process there, I started, kind of moving out of that world and focusing more on individual contracts and bigger contracts and things. And started working on Wolfenstein and Killer Instinct and obviously Doom and stuff like that.
How does that sort of relationship work? Because I feel like music is the type of thing where there are individuals like you who have a really good, strong grasp of it, but then a lot of people, even creative people, if they're not used to working with music, they sort of don't really know what they want. So how does, for instance, like a Need for Speed game or, Shoot Mania, how do they go to you and say, oh, we want it to sound like this? And then how do you sort of make it sound like that?
Yeah, it's really important actually to have the start of each project. You spend this big time kind of coming up with some sort of joint creative language where you're both able to use similar words and you both understand the same meaning behind those words. If there's any ambiguity behind the conversation, 18 months later when you've got no time left, you're going to run into all sorts of troubles. So it's important at the start of every project, we always try to spend that time discovering each other's kind of creative boundaries and what each person means. So when somebody says, hey, let's make it really heavy, what does that actually mean? Because heavy to them might mean something completely different to somebody else, for example. So that's kind of how that works. That's pretty much the only trick I've figured out with that sort of stuff is to try and get both on the same page creatively.
And does that mean usually traveling to talk to people? Does that help? Like going to the id offices, did that help that process?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of visiting offices. I think that's really important. It's so, like, a big part of our job is just kind of sitting in a studio tinkering around with sounds and stuff. We're not really, outdoorsy types a lot of the time. We're kind of stuck in a cave, right? So it's really important to kind of get out and mix with other human beings. And visiting a video game studio is one of the most inspiring things you can do. It really is. You've got an entire floor of 50, 60, 70 people. They're all the best in the business. They're the best artists, they're the best programmers, they're the best designers, they're the best engine people, whatever. They're the best in the business. And they're all there kind of coming together, bringing their skills and their histories and their knowledge together to make a video game. And that's incredible. That really is incredibly inspiring. So I always try to, on every single project, is to have some in-studio time. You get to put faces to names. So when you're kind of chatting to somebody over email, you know what they look like, you know, kind of what their kind of mood is like, you know, different times of the day, what they're feeling like at different times of the day and things. That's really important too. So yeah, that sort of thing is so important. When I visited the id Studios in Dallas, it was incredible. I mean, you've been there. The glass cabinet that greets you when you enter the office is amazing. It's full of those old, clay sculptures and things that they used 20 years ago to make the monsters and things back then, the demons back then. And it's incredible to see how far our technology has come since then, and how far those guys really pushed the boundary back then to, illustrate their vision. That was really impressive. That was really amazing.
What was your first impression of meeting Hugo and Marty, sort of coming in and seeing what they were trying to do with this studio?
Yeah, it was interesting. I hadn't really seen much beforehand. They'd sent me a couple of videos and I had a bit of a rough idea. But it wasn't a game I really understood until they sat me down and put a controller in my hands and said, play it. And I don't know why, but I remember sitting down with Marty and playing the game, and it felt like Doom. It didn't feel like something else. It didn't feel like another modern first-person shooter. It felt like a Doom game. And we had a brief discussion as to how that kind of happened. And he kind of, told me that it was all about timing and pacing and things like that. But it was the weirdest thing to grab a controller after 20 years of playing Doom back in the day. And then it felt the same. It felt like a Doom game. And that was impressive. And I always feel whenever I walk onto a project, if you're working on 18 months before the project finishes and it already feels fun at that point, you're onto something pretty cool. That's a good thing.
Excellent. So you sort of came in around with, let's say, a year and a half left of the project. Is that right?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a blur, to be honest. I worked on Doom for about 2 years, almost 2 years.
Cool.
So
awesome.
yeah, about that. We started with QuakeCon back in, 2014, I think. Yeah, right. I think.
Awesome stuff. So I guess, what's it like, it must be quite intimidating to try and reimagine such an iconic soundtrack. What was your creative process sort of starting this whole venture?
Yeah, whenever you're working on a huge franchise like Doom, it's important to kind of put that legacy on a high pedestal. It really is. I'm a big believer in that. I'm not a big believer in like pushing everything aside from the past and then trying to create something new or recreate it. I think it's really important to pay really strong tribute to that legacy that has come before. That being said, though, if you focus on that too much, you're going to get very laser focused and become intimidated and scared and lose your confidence with the work that you're doing. So one of the first things that we kind of did is actually just crossed out the word Doom. I just started ignoring that word, and I said, well, what is this game all about? What's it actually about? It is very much a modern first-person shooter, don't get me wrong, but it's futuristic. It's a futuristic science fiction. It very is. It's set, far, far, far off into the future with all sorts of crazy technology. There's obviously the invasion, the hellish invasion. What does that actually mean? What does hell mean? What has hell meant to different civilizations and people in the past? Where has that come from? What does hell mean today? How is hell being illustrated by Hugo and the team in this game? What does Mars mean? What does Mars mean in terms of isolation, being away from Earth, planet Earth, home, essentially? What does that mean? Being the only human left on a barren planet, was quite interesting. What does it mean to be, kind of scared of demons? Are you scared of demons? And, through that big giant process of looking at every single facet of Doom, we kind of stumbled onto this idea that you're the enemy of the demons in the game. And that's very different to every other, kind of action-based game out there where you're, the lone survivor, you're the savior, you're the one who's beating everybody or whatever. We thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we played it from the demon's perspective? And we said, no, this demon slayer, the Doom guy, right? He's the bad guy. He's the evil one, right? He's the one that's coming to kill us all. So once we started looking at it from that angle, it started to make a lot more sense, and we were able to get away from that Doom hang-up in the past and kind of find something that was new and original for today.
So I guess, what was one of the first tracks that sort of laid the foundation for that? Was there any ones that you worked on early on that we can still see in the game today, or rather hear in the game today? Yeah,
it's interesting. So when I visited the id offices and I chatted to Hugo and Martin, one of the big things that everybody talks about was that they really didn't want heavy metal in the game. They didn't want it to feel like a heavy metal thing. And I totally understood that at that point too, because they didn't want it to feel like some sort of cliche, corny thing. They didn't want it to feel like Bill and Ted, basically. That was everybody's fear, Does it feel like a Bill and Ted game? So we spent the first couple of months just experimenting with synthesizers and coming up with different synth sounds and seeing how far we could push synths. And we did things like took synths and ran them through guitar pedals and stuff like that to try and make them really aggressive and angry and play the role of a guitar, but it had a different sound. It had a different sort of vibe about it. And a lot of that stuff was heard in the original QuakeCon demo that was kind of behind closed doors. But some of that stuff ended up showing in the E3 demo as well. After that E3 demo, the reaction from fans was, it's kind of cool, but it didn't feel like Doom. And after that E3 showing, we started kind of incorporating a little bit more of guitar elements. And once we started with like 5%, it started to feel really good and it started to feel more like a Doom game. We started adding 10% and 15%. And by the time we finished, we had a pretty guitar chunky sort of soundtrack in the end.
Yeah, when I was talking to Marty about it, he said internally there was a little bit of reticence to sort of have the soundtrack maybe take over the audio landscape of the game. Obviously audio priority is a really important thing in game design, like being able to make sure that the player can hear lots of things, not just the music. The music in Doom, it's pretty front and center. Like it's not like some sort of track that's playing in the background. A lot of the time, it's not so much complimenting the player as it is driving the player. Was that something that sort of, I guess, happened over the course of your work on the soundtrack?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm a really big fan of 90s video game music. To me, some of the best music that we have in the industry came from that period. The stuff that went into, the original Killer Instinct and the original Doom and Banjo-Kazooie and then Perfect Dark and these sort of great games from that period. One thing that all of those games really shared in common was that the music was really front and center. You really knew the music back to front. You could sing those melodies back to front. And I feel as we've kind of progressed through the years, a lot of things have progressed, but music's not one of those things. Music's been pushed to the background. So with this, because Doom's obviously a big franchise from the 90s, I kind of wanted to pay tribute to that regard as well, where the music should really sit up front and center. The player should be aware of the music. The music needs to play that sort of emotional payoff role. It is the reward for doing well. It is the motivator. It tells them that, yes, you are okay, you are doing well, everybody's scared of you, you are you're the killer here. That's definitely something that I try to do in a lot of my work is bring the music more up front, get people to remember music again, get people to enjoy video game music again.
When you were developing all this music then, I guess, like, were you basically sort of creating different shades of what you were, of this sonic landscape, I guess, and then giving it to them, and then they were applying it to specific situations? Like, how does that work? Because obviously, like, I listen to one song and I'm like, oh, that's the Spider Mastermind track, obviously it's called that, and that's the BFG division track, so that's why it's called that. How does that work? Do you just create sort of a plethora of music and then give it to them and they sort of go back to you and ask to edit it? Like, how does that back and forth kind of work?
Right, so essentially you have the hierarchy, right? You have the overall hierarchy. At number top you have Doom, so everything that you do needs to sound like it's part of Doom. Underneath that we'd have 3 different areas that were kind of lower in the hierarchy. One of those areas was UAC, one of those areas was Hell, and one of those areas was more industrial, kind of gritty, lava-based sort of stuff, like the factory sort of thing that you hear at the starter level. So that's the beginning of a hierarchy. Underneath that, you have all the different individual scenarios that happen. So that Spider Mastermind, for example, that's very much a boss battle, so it's a bigger sort of track, but it occurs in Hell, right? So it has that sort of thing, that big part of it, but then it has a bit of element of that industrial thing as well. So we kind of start, kind of building within that hierarchy. And then once you've got that hierarchy kind of decided upon, basically they'd send me like a gameplay footage, and I'd sit there and I'd throw it up on the television. And it's kind of weird. I throw the gameplay footage up on the television and I grab a controller, and the controller's not even plugged in. It's a video. I can't play it. And I just sit there holding it, like pretending like I'm playing the game. And because that's my gaming space, I'm used to getting certain emotional reactions to video games in that space. So while I'm watching the video and certain things happen within the video, I get a feeling of like where that music should probably be taking that situation, that scenario. And I sit there with a little app on my iPhone, it's a little like a metronome app, and I just tap on that metronome, and that gives me beats per minute that feels appropriate for that battle. Then what I do is take that back into the studio, and by that point I've already got what the music needs to do and the tempo tempo that it needs to be at. At that point, we also know where that situation is going to be occurring within the hierarchy. So once we've got all that information, we can actually sit down and start, building the track. And the reason I do it like that is because we've got a framework that you're able to actually work to. If you just kind of went in raw or whatever without any idea, it's very difficult to come up with stuff. So that's kind of how that comes about.
That's fantastic. What was the first time you got to sort of play the game with your music in it then? Was that close to launch, or did you eventually get like an early build of it?
When I went to visit the id Studio, they had a little couple of kind of early synth pieces in the game at that point. And that was kind of the first point I'd heard it. And even at that point, I was like, yeah, no, it's kind of cool, but it's not really working. Like, it's not quite there. And it was great with leaving that studio and flying all the way back to Australia with just a head full of ideas. And really that 16-hour flight all the way home, I had my little notebook there and I had my laptop and I was working on stuff just to get those ideas down while they were still fresh. But that was kind of the first time there. I only got to visit the studio once. So after that, I wasn't able to experience any of the music in the game after that. And a lot of the time too, when you're doing this sort of stuff, everybody is so busy when you're writing music for video games and everybody's, working on the game in the studio, everybody's so busy. So usually we just kind of work on that stuff and send it over. And then you don't hear it again until the game comes out. But I remember sitting here and I was working on something, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, it was a really late night and I was working up till like 4 o'clock in the morning and Doom just got released on all the digital outlets. And while I was working away, I had a couple of like Twitch streamers up and they were playing through it. And at that point, like you have no idea whether the music that you've done for the game is actually good or not. You really have no idea. It's all just a fly-by seat of the pants type of thing for the whole 18 months. You just rush. And I remember watching one of these Twitch streamers and he got up to like the second level and his head started bopping when the music came on. I was like, I think this thing might turn out okay. I think it might be all right. Yeah.
So what was it like then seeing the reaction subsequently? Because, I mean, whenever anyone talks about Doom 2016, obviously a lot of people enjoyed the game and completed the game, but you ask people to jot down some of the things they like about it, and music is always mentioned.
Well, I mean, that's a trigger. I mean, obviously you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of big part of my life, was working on this sort of music for 18 months or whatever. And it's all consuming. It is 18 hours a day. So it's really nice to see a positive reaction to that when the game comes out. It's really humbling in a way that people have kind of taken it on so much and they've kind of enjoyed it so much. That's been really, really quite cool. Because honestly, when you're working on this stuff, you have no idea. You have no idea. There's tracks in the game that people point to as their favorite tracks that we originally rejected. We originally threw them out. Rip and Tear was one of those tracks. It was made for E3 and we originally threw it out because it just didn't feel right for that E3 presentation. So it's interesting to see how things kind of change over time. But yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the fans are incredible. Doom fans are just incredible. They're absolutely mind-blowing. They get so far behind the project. They really push it. They really, really do. But they're also fans in a way that you can't trick them. You can't just offer up some sort of substandard Doom game and slap the Doom logo on and expect everybody to buy it. That it needs to be good for them. So they're a difficult audience to please, but a good audience to please at the same time. And when that soundtrack came out, we saw it just kind of, jumping up through the charts. That was because of fans. It wasn't because of the music at all. It's because the fans got behind it, and that's the important thing to point there.
Like a lot of creative people, you're very humble. But speaking of crowds and pleasing them, what was it like getting on stage at the Game Awards? Again, when people heard that you were going to be there, they were incredibly hyped up for it, and you lived up to expectation as well. What was it like getting out there and doing it?
Well, thanks, Danny. Cheers, man. It was really fun. So Jeff Keighley sent us all an email and he said, look, I've got this really great idea. How about we put together like a Doom live performance for the Game Awards? And the idea of that just blew my mind. I thought that would be so cool. But at that time, we only had not much time left. We only had a few weeks left before the Game Awards. But Jeff's just one of those guys that you can't say no to. And, it was just such a cool opportunity that we really couldn't say no to it. So, the first thing I did was okay, we've got to put a band together, right? And, for me, the Doom dream band would have to have Sonic Mayhem in it. The music that he did for Quake 2 really inspired the Doom score. I felt that all I was trying to do with the Doom music was just write a modern version of the stuff that he was doing for Quake 2 back in the day. So it was a big giant tribute to him, I feel, with the Doom music. So when I reached out to him, I'd never really spoken to him before, and I asked him if he wanted to stand on stage in a couple of weeks and play, some stuff live at the Doom for the Game Awards, and he said yes. And I didn't even know at that point. To me, it didn't even feel like the whole thing was going to be possible until he said yes, and that was really cool. And then, of course, we needed a drummer, and looking around, to me, there was only one drummer on Earth that could actually pull those Doom parts off in a live situation, and that was Matt Halpern from Periphery. So when he said yes to doing it as well, I knew that we could pull it off. It felt achievable at that point. But I hadn't played on stage in like 13 years. So it was a big undertaking. We spent a couple of days rehearsing and putting the arrangements together and working with lighting crews and making sure everything's synced up really cool. And yeah, it was a blur. It was an absolute blur. It was a lot of fun. So
must have been very interesting. I guess writing all this music, never thinking you're going to have to play it live, and then suddenly, whoops, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this in front of all these people.
Right. I think, honestly, video game music should always be able to find some sort of a place outside of the video game. I think that should be the ultimate goal. If you can make music for a video game that somebody can listen to outside of the game, I think that's a pretty good goal to work toward. The fact that people wanted to hear that stuff live was just, again, it's a testament to the fans and how much they enjoyed the game. And really, it's a great thing of the video game industry. There's not many industries on Earth where we could stand on stage in front of 3.8 million people live around the world and play some Doom riffs for 3 minutes. That's a pretty unique thing right there.
That's awesome. Just got a couple of more questions. Thank you again so much for all your time. If you want to have a drink of water or something, or you're all right, or
I think I'm all right. Is it coming through all right?
No, it sounds great on our end. I just don't want to I want to make sure you're not uncomfortable.
That's all. No, I'm good, Danny. Cheers, man.
So I guess you sort of spoke to the Twitch streaming part of it. Have you played through the game yourself? Have you? There's some people who don't like consuming their own creative talents, but have you played it through yourself?
It's weird because you live with the project for so long. When it actually comes time to sit down and play it for enjoyment, you really can't switch that side off. It's always critical. So when I booted up the game and sat down and played for the first time, I do it in a dark room. I pull all the curtains shut. I make sure nobody pays attention. I log off on everything. I don't want anybody to know that I'm playing it, because to me it's just embarrassing the whole way through. All you see is the things that you could have done better. But I think what's cool about that is that you can learn a lot from that process, and it's a really unique process to work on a project for so long, then have it come out, go down to the shop, pick it off the shelf, go home, put it in the console, and then start playing it. That's a really unique experience, and yeah, so I see all sides of it. Basically, I see the stuff that kind of went okay, but I see a lot of the stuff that we could have done a lot better at the same time as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way.
What are some of the things you would change, or you'd like to have seen done better?
I think when you're working on a project like this for like 18 months to 2 years. I'd like to say that we knew exactly what we were going to do, 18 months, 2 years ago, but the truth is you don't. You really don't know. It's just a constant series of small little decisions and reactions that happen over that period that result in the game releasing. So when you finish it, though, you'd say, well, man, imagine if we knew that. So at that end point, you're like, imagine if we knew that stuff way back then. Imagine the sort of game that we could have created with that, But of course, the curse of that is that when you finish that, you go, oh, man, imagine if we went back and after we knew all that sort of stuff and then go again, So I guess this is the thing. Every project is a learning experience, and I look at it as a learning experience. And you learn for that whole period of time. You experiment, you react, you see what works, what doesn't work. And then you take those things onto the next project.
What would you say is one of your sort of favorite standout tracks in the soundtrack?
That's always a difficult thing to ask because I worked on them for so long. That Hellwalker track, that main menu track, I sat on that for like 5 weeks straight. It just consumed my life. I was dreaming about it. I was humming it when I was walking the dogs. I couldn't escape it. I was to the point where I absolutely hated it when I finished it. I was just so sick of it. So other tracks like BFG Division, for example, that stuff came about after I visited the id offices and I sat down and they showed me the BFG room with all the big giant lasers and explosions and stuff. And that riff just kind of popped into my head when I was sitting in the offices there. And I was kind of happy with how that one kind of came out. I think that kind of encapsulated all the things that we were trying to do with the new Doom in one piece of music, which I think was kind of cool. I also enjoyed a lot of the stuff that we did with synthesizers too. I felt that we kind of were able to discover some sort of synth stuff that was a little bit different, focusing on really big subwoofer sort of sine waves and crazy weird crackling noise stuff and lots of weird different analog circuits and things. That sort of stuff was a lot of fun to play with. But I don't know. I mean, you work on these sort of things for so long, and as I said, they're all consuming. What was great was really being able to spend the time doing a proper soundtrack, though. A lot of the time with games, you just kind of got to grab the music out of the game and then slap it on a disc or whatever and then send it out to the world. Whereas with this, we're really able to sit down and create that ultimate sort of Doom album experience and treat it like a concept album, and work in those sort of voice files and stuff like that, which was really cool.
Yeah, the amount of TLC, it seems to be incredible with the... for instance, did you know when you were developing the music that they were going to do that whole effect where whenever the glory kills got initiated, that the sort of the audio almost like sort of vacuums out and then kind of pulls back in again?
Yeah, all that stuff was by design. So when I'm working here, I work with the team at the same time to get a list of like what things are possible. And one of the things that was always possible from the beginning was these glory kills. And so what I wanted to do was support that in music. Whenever you did that, it kind of felt like it needed to be a cool sort of moment where all the music sort of drops out and it focuses just on this glory kill and the sound effects and things are in that. And then the music comes back in afterwards. And what's cool like that is it starts to feel a bit more like an action movie. It starts to feel like that the action hero is running toward the edge of the building and then the action hero jumps. And as they're jumping, right, everything drops out and it goes slow motion and it kind of, they float through the air and then land and the music kicks back in. So that was kind of the idea of that. I remember Hugo Martin said something really interesting about how he wanted to be, killing demons with a shotgun on a skateboard. It needed to feel like you were kind of smooth and flowing. And so the music needed to be kind of smooth and flowing at the same time to reinforce that feeling.
Awesome. That's pretty much all the questions I have. I guess what I wanted to know as well was, like, it's incredible you talking about this. Me and my creative partner Jeremy, who's beside me, we talk a lot about how, like, different medias, we sort of have it easy. We're talking about how making video, it's a process that takes, a couple of weeks and then you're done with it and it's over. Like, writing a book takes fucking years. He writes music as well at home, and he was sort of talking about, and you're sort of echoing it here, that, like, when you're working on this stuff, it just, you're talking about 5 weeks of your life for one track. Do you take some time off after one of these projects before you take the next one to sort of give yourself that, creative free space to just let your brain sort of reset?
I find I'm not usually afforded the liberty of time to be able to do that normally, because what happens is that when you're finishing a project, things get delayed. So you might say it's going to finish on the 1st of November, but it might drag on for a week or two after that. And so what happens then is that the next project you're about to go onto is already 2 weeks behind by the time you're starting. And right. that's a really horrible situation to be in. And so it's difficult at that time to go, you know what, I'm going to take another 6 months off right now. It's just not possible. What I try to do, though, is have a stable balance. So my days start really early. I'm up at 4:30 in the morning, and I work this system called blocking, which is where you work for 2 hours straight. And that's no distractions. You shut down all internet. There's no social media, nothing whatsoever. You're not reading newspapers, whatever. It's focused solely on the work at hand. So you do that for 2 hours, and then you have a half-hour break, and that's where you might check in on social medias or whatever it might be. And so I do 5 of those a day with a lunch break in between. Now, in amongst all that too, there's also gym time and exercise time. That's really important to kind of keep some sort of physical level. If that sort of stuff drops, I find that the other stuff drops pretty quickly. I can't get up early in the morning. I can't focus on creative stuff. I can't do a 16-hour flight. You just can't do it. So I've got to keep that sort of physical level up as well. So if you can find this sort of balance with that sort of stuff, it's easier to be able to meet those deadlines consistently, which is really, really important, because you just can't. When that project finishes, you just got to kind of jump onto the next one. Creatively, I try to throw everything out though. When you finish a project, you've been doing it for 18 months. What you've essentially been doing is practicing that project for 18 months. So that's practicing every habit, every bad habit, every good habit for 18 months. So it's really important at the end of that to scrap all of that, throw it all away, and then move on to the next thing and start from the beginning. We throw everything out and go all the way back to the beginning. And it's almost like relearning music for that project. The reason we do that, though, is because that way not all games sound the same. If we just finished Doom and then went straight on to Prey would just sounding like Doom, and it doesn't. It needs to sound like Prey, for example.
That's wonderful. As somebody who's just started a sole proprietary shop that's quite creative, I actually think I might take some of that advice on board as well.
How are you guys doing? I mean, you're like doing video after video after video after video, but you've got your sort of approach that's consistent, which is you've had for quite a few years, I think, Danny, haven't you? Really?
Yeah, it's we're sort of balancing that thing where the template allows us to get the stuff out pretty quickly, which is important, but also it's it's dangerous because you don't want to have any template, like you're saying, like flushing the system is really important. So I think after this one we're going to sort of do something very different. We're not going to focus on a game, so hopefully that'll go down well.
I absolutely love what you guys are doing. I think it's incredible. It's something that's desperately needed in the game industry. Is these really high level critical, high level documentary, high level analysis, although that's also entertaining at the same time. And it's something that you've done for many years, I know, with your GameSpot work and things as such as well. So I'm so glad to kind of see you out and doing more of this. I just think it's incredible. It really is. Thanks
so much. That's very, very humble to hear you say that. It's seeing people react to it is like the best. So it's what I always wanted to watch. So if we can make it for other people, then that's the dream come true. So I guess what are you working on next? Yeah, you mentioned Prey. What other projects are you working on?
Yeah, I just finished Prey for Arcane. I'm doing a little indie game called Routine. It's a fun game that we've been doing for a couple of years. Excuse me. It's where myself and 3 others got together and we gave ourselves a challenge of making a AAA quality game with only 4 people and no money.
Oh, wow.
And so it's kind of ridiculous. And we've been working on that now for probably close to 6 years. And that's almost finished. It's going to be out in March, which is going to be cool. The other stuff I can't talk about. There's 3 other projects coming after that, but I can't talk about them. One has been announced, but I'm not even allowed to talk about it, which is great fun. And the next one I think is going to be announced at E3, which is really, really super exciting. And the one after that is really exciting as well. They're always really exciting. That's what everybody says, but it's probably at least 2 years away from being announced. And then there is another one after that, which ties into all this sort of other stuff that we've been talking about, which is going to be coming off far in the future as well.